Hey guys, this is John. So in the previous video, we discussed how to properly evaluate and play king and pawn versus king, which I consider to be the backbone of virtually all endgame knowledge. And in talking about that ending, we had a thorough discussion of the opposition. Now, if the opposition is not familiar to you, or you're clueless about king and pawn versus king, I'd recommend stopping this video right now and going back and watching that other video first before proceeding. But for those of you who have watched that first video, or for those of you who just want a bit of a refresher on opposition, I have an exercise for you. And I wanted to say that it's important when you're studying chess to not simply passively digest the material via a video, a book, whatever resource you're utilizing. You also have to put that material into practice, and you have to play out the positions, the openings, the end games on your own. It's not enough just to sit back and take the person's word for it, whoever you're studying from, or take the book's word for it. You got to move the pieces around yourself. So my hope is that you'll tackle this exercise wholeheartedly and try to understand this endgame better for yourself. So with that being said, this is an endgame that I first came across in Jonathan Hawkins' book called Amateur to IM. Jonathan Hawkins is an English grandmaster, and he wrote a book detailing the things that he did to reach international master. And surprise, surprise, studying endgames was one of the huge things he recommends in improving your chess. And he gave this as a puzzle, and I think it beautifully illustrates the concept of the opposition. So I'm going to show it to you guys. So you might be wondering what's so special about this, because it's just king and rook for white versus lone king for black. Isn't that an easy win for the side with the rook? And you're right, it is an easy win for the side with the rook. But we're putting a bit of a twist on things. So instead of white being able to move normally, white can make exactly one move with the rook. Okay, so one move with the white rook, no more than that. White can move the king as many times as they want, and so can black in reply, but this white rook can only be moved once. And just to clarify what that means, when you move this white rook, it has to be checkmate. Anything else will be a failure for white because you won't be checkmating the black king. So the challenge is, white to move. How can white win this position only moving the white rook one time? And I'd recommend pausing your video and trying to figure this out. I'd also recommend playing this out with someone if you have a playing partner available. So if you want to stop your video, you can do so now. Okay, so now that you've had a chance to play around with this endgame a little bit, let's discuss a few things. So, as we've talked about already, you're limited with the rook, so you can only move it one time, and it better be checkmate when you do. So that means that your king has to somehow get the opposing king, black's king, into a totally defensive position so that the rook can come in and checkmate. And sometimes when I'm solving positions, I like to think of an ideal position where if everything went correctly, I would be able to achieve this position. And for white, it probably looks something like this. So white's king very far advanced, cornering the black king, and the black king being subject to checkmate via rook c8 checkmate. Or it could be, let's say the white king is on c7 instead of b6, and black's king is like a7 or a8 even, one of these squares. You could be playing rook a1 checkmate. So you want that black king stuck somewhere on the side of the board where white's king has made a lot of progress. Now, in order to achieve this, you're going to have to use opposition. And the first move is incredibly important. There's only one correct first move for white. And that move is king a2. The other moves, king b1 or king b2, are incorrect, and they would allow black to save the game. If king b1, which I don't know why people would choose that anyways, it's not an obvious looking move. The problem is black will go king b7. And if we run through the criteria for the opposition that we established last time, we will quickly see that black has the opposition. So the kings are on the same color square. There's an odd number of squares in between them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. An odd number, and it's the opponent's turn to move. It's white's turn to move. And that affects how the kings line up when they start approaching each other. So if white were to now come up the board, king b2, black is playing king b6, king b3, king b5, black's king will always be able to keep white's king out and prevent it from coming further forward and thereby pushing the black king back. White would probably play something like king a3, and black would go king a5, stopping the white king from coming up to b4 or a4. So we're playing prevent defense. King b3, right back, king b5. Going backward isn't going to help white. Also stepping to the c file isn't going to help white. King c3, black's king is just going to follow. And white is a long ways from forcing any kind of checkmate, and it's just not going to happen. So the starting move, king to b1, would simply allow the draw. After king b7, black takes the opposition. Now similarly, king b2 fails for the same reason for white. Black can play king b8. And this functions exactly the same way. In playing king b8, we have the kings on the same color square, odd number of squares in between them, it's 5 squares again, and it's white to move. If white comes up with their king, black will just mimic and keep the opposition. Black will maintain the opposition. Let's say king b4, king b6. That white king is never getting around black's king. If you think of these 3 squares as the squares we're fighting for control of, c5, b5, a5, white's king isn't going to be able to occupy those squares and outflank black. It's going to be the same type of thing, king a4, king a6. If we could move the rook again, this would be no problem, but we can't by the rules of this mini game. So king a2 is absolutely necessary, and I'm confident that if you watched that first video, you found this move. In playing king a2, white takes the opposition for themselves. So now black to move. There's an odd number of squares in between, kings on same color square. Let's first illustrate what would happen if black just came forward with their king. So let's say black played king b7. White would go king b3, keeping the opposition. King b6, king b4. Now, if black doesn't want to go back to b7 or a7, they would probably play king a6. And here is where outflanking comes in handy for white. In playing king a6, black is keeping an eye on b5 and a5, but black loses control over c5. And that's the square that the white king will go to, king c5, outflanking. Opposition on its own is not enough to win. You have to employ the concept of outflanking as well. That kind of goes hand in hand with opposition. That's how you actually get the upper hand and eventually win the game. And in playing king c5, white is conquering territory and bringing their king up the board. If black goes king a5 here, then it's game over immediately. White can expend their rook move with rook a1 checkmate. So black must instead retreat, either king b7 or king a7. Let's say king b7. White will play king b5, taking the opposition again. Black can never go to the c file with the rook standing on c1, so let's say king a7, and white just repeats the process, king to c6. Black could try to get tricky here and play king a8, because note that king b8 would be the same after king b6. But on king a8, white just continues moving up the board, so king c7. And this sort of thing happens frequently when you're trying to outflank. If you can keep a file in between the two kings, then the opposing king is still able to take opposition back if necessary. So on king a8, king c7 is a perfect answer. Forcing king a7, and once again, white can use the rook move to deliver checkmate. Rook a1 mate. So that's just a sample of how the game could go after king a2 if black starts moving their king up. You can see that white is always Johnny on the spot with their own king moves to maintain opposition and then eventually outflank black. Now, it's trickier if black plays the best defense here, which is holding back with the king and playing king b8. King b8 is a crafty move. And in fact, I'm going to encourage you to pause the video and try to figure out how white should respond to king b8. So what should white play here? Alright, so against king b8, white needs to employ a cunning reply because playing king b3 would be a massive blunder. If king b3, black plays king b7. Black takes back the opposition. So what does white need to do? White needs to play king to b2, keeping the opposition, maintaining that opposition. We keep an odd number of squares in between the king, and it's black to move once again. Now, we know what to do if black comes up to a7 or b7. We have these corresponding squares, b3 or a3. But what if black plays king a8? Saying, go ahead, try to make progress here. King a2 isn't progress, that's just a repetition. And king b3 or king a3 will be bad because we come here or here. Now white can outflank, however. White can play king c3. And by advancing up the board but keeping a file in between, white ensures that they can take opposition back when necessary. And you can start to notice corresponding squares. If black goes to b8 or b7, white has the corresponding squares b3 or b4. And in doing so, they will keep opposition. So let's say black plays king a7 instead. White doesn't want to step to the b file. Stepping to the b file would allow black to play king b7 or king b6 and take the opposition, so king c4 is appropriate. So long as black stays on that a file, white's going to advance up the c file. They're making progress, and they know that they can get the opposition back when necessary. Let's say king a6, king c5. And here the walls start to close on black. King a5 is not an option because of what we talked about earlier, rook a1 checkmate. So let's say king a7 coming back, king c6. White pushes ahead. Let's say king b8, king b6, opposition. Now black's only move left, king a8, and finally rook c8 checkmate. So this is how the white king, by using opposition, can push around the black king. Because with king a2, white takes opposition first, and the geometry of the kings plays out in favor of the holder of opposition. And I think it's just so neat how that works, how the lone king can push around the black king and kind of force it to where white wants it to go to. So white can come in with the rook and give checkmate. So if you're ever looking to teach opposition, or if you just want to review it, this is a great exercise to do that. Anyways, if you have any questions about this, let me know in the comments. Hope this was helpful to you guys, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. Bye.